Okay, so, ever wonder what the British invasion was? Ever wonder why the Beatles were so popular? And how the Rolling Stones just suddenly took over the world? Well, today we're going to show you. Ever heard of the Rolling Stones? The Who? Maybe the Kinks? The Beatles? No? Are you serious? Where have you been? The last 40 years? Alright, yeah. You weren't born yet. Oh, and just to let you know, neither was I. Right, what we're talking about? The British invasion. Duh. Well, the British invasion happened from 1964 to 1967. It was a variety of rock and roll, beat, and pop groups from the UK. And they became famous, especially in the US, but also in Canada, and also in Australia and elsewhere. These British rock and roll groups were really popular and spread quickly through the English-speaking world. Especially, guess who? The US. Now, the British invasion was said to be led by the Beatles, whose arrival in New York Airport on February 7th, 1964 is said to be throwing the US doors open to British rock and roll talent. The Beatles' appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show on February 9th, 1964 was said to be the breakthrough moment of the British invasion. Now, a lot of British groups tried to replicate the 1950s rock and roll sound, but they failed. So they tried to sing US folk songs, but instead they sang it with a lot more spirit, and so it came out very differently. They concentrated less on the instruments and more on the spirit and the sound of the vocals. The Beatles' work was utterly impeccable. Some may agree, some may disagree, but you have to admit, it was a completely different sound at the time. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, and George Harrison were the members of the Beatles, and they were from Liverpool, England. Now you may want to know, how in the world did an English band back then get noticed in America? Well, I'm about to tell you. Well, the Beatles were originally called the Quarrymen, but to cut a long story short, they decided on the Beatles, and that name stuck, as you can see. Well, the Beatles started touring England at first, and they played in little clubs down where teens would listen.